The wind swept low across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant rain. To most, the land between Fort Wallace and the sacred ridges of the Cheyenne was wild, untamed, and dangerous. To Eliza Monroe, it was the only place she felt free. A rancher's daughter turned healer, Eliza had spent the last 3 years mending bones, stitching wounds, and making poultices from bark and berries, skills her mother had learned from a Cheyenne woman long before war built fences between peoples. But healing had its limits, especially for a woman alone in the Colorado Territory in 1871. She'd been warned not to ride past the ridge, not to stray from the safe paths. But that morning, something, instinct, maybe fate, pulled her deeper into the woods. That's when she found him. At first, all she saw was blood, then the figure beneath it. A man, Cheyenne by his dress, lying under the shadow of fallen pine, breathing barely. His side was torn, not by animal, but by lead, the kind of wound that came from men, not beasts. Eliza dropped from her horse without thinking. She pressed her fingers to his neck. Pulse! "You're alive," she whispered, more to herself than to him. She had no idea who he was, or why someone had tried to kill him, but she knew one thing. If she left him here, he wouldn't survive the night, and something in her heart refused to let that happen. By sunset, she'd made camp near a creek bend, using what little linen she had to wrap the worst of the bleeding. He hadn't stirred, not once, but his chest rose and fell steadily now. She studied his face in the firelight. Strong brow, high cheekbones, a deep scar running from temple to jaw. Not fresh, but old and proud. He was a warrior, and Eliza was risking everything, her safety, her home, her reputation, by saving him. But as the fire crackled and the trees stood silent guard, she realized she wasn't afraid. Not of him, not of what the world might say. What she feared most was that she might never know who he was, or why her heart had already decided he was meant to live. By the time dawn filtered through the trees, the man still hadn't spoken, but his breathing had steadied. The fever that had threatened his life the night before had broken in the early hours. Thanks to Eliza's willow bark tea and whispered prayers, she hadn't spoken since she was a child. She sat near the fire, one hand holding a worn journal, the other resting near the hilt of a small knife. Not for defense, but reassurance. Not all wounds bled on the outside, and she knew what it meant to be hunted in silence. When she finally looked up, he was watching her. Eyes sharp, quiet, studying her the way a hawk might study the wind. Eliza froze, not out of fear, but recognition. Those eyes were not wild. They were intelligent, deep brown, with shadows that had seen too much loss. The kind of gaze that didn't plead or demand, but remembered. She spoke softly. "I don't know your name. I only knew you were dying." He didn't speak. Instead, he glanced down at the bandage on his side, then slowly met her eyes again. Finally, his voice broke through the morning. "You should have let me go." Eliza blinked. "Would you have let me die?" He looked away, and didn't answer. By mid-morning, he sat up with difficulty. She brought him water, and he took it, cautiously. There was no trust yet, but there was no threat either. After a while, he asked, "You're not afraid of me?" Eliza stirred the fire. "Should I be?" His mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile, if it wasn't so hollow. "Most white settlers are." Eliza didn't flinch. "I'm not most." He tilted his head as if trying to place her. Finally, he said, "My name is Tazanan." The syllables moved like wind through pine, soft, powerful, rooted in memory. Eliza nodded slowly. "I'm Eliza." He repeated it slower, the sound strange in his mouth. "Li-za," she smiled. "Close enough." That night, they sat in the glow of the fire again, strangers bound by circumstance, silence stretching between them like a thread not yet knotted. Eliza asked gently, "What happened to you?" Tassanan looked into the flames. "There are men who would rather my people disappear. I did not disappear fast enough." The words settled heavy in the clearing. But Eliza didn't speak pity. She only whispered, "I'm sorry." He turned toward her, studied her. "You carry grief too." Eliza looked away, eyes glassy. "I lost someone, a brother. Soldiers said it was an ambush, but I know better. They were unarmed." Silence again, but not cold this time. Shared. And in that hush, between wound and memory, something began to bloom. Understanding, the first root of trust. And perhaps, the first step on a path neither of them had meant to walk. The next day, Eliza helped Tazanan to his feet for the first time. He was still weak, his breath sharp, but he stood, tall and proud, even in pain. She handed him a carved stick for balance, and he took it with a nod. "No thanks, no flourish, just quiet strength." They walked slowly along the creek bed. Not far. Just enough for him to stretch his legs, and for her to keep an eye on the way his wound responded. "You don't ask questions," he said as they rested beneath a pine. Eliza smiled faintly. "You don't answer them." That earned her a glance, maybe even a hint of respect. He sat down, breath uneven. "You were not born out here." It wasn't a question, it was a knowing. She nodded. My father ran cattle in Kansas. My mother, she paused. She was half Shoshone. Taught me how to listen to the trees, how to heal with bark and stone. Tasinan looked at her fully then, for the first time, as more than a settler's daughter. There was something in her that belonged to the land, even if the town would never say so. You are between two worlds, he murmured. She looked at him. So are you? That sat between them like an echo that didn't need to fade. Later, as evening approached, they returned to the small camp she'd built. Eliza brewed more willow bark, mixing in wild mint for the bitterness. As she worked, Tasinan began to hum, a low sound, a melody that didn't belong to the white man's church hymns or soldier marches. It moved like a river, not rushed, not lost, just there. Just, Eliza paused, watching him. That song, it's beautiful. Tasinan didn't open his eyes. It's for those who leave us, but it is not a sad song. It reminds us they walk ahead. We only follow later. Her voice caught in her throat. My brother, he never got a song. He looked up. Then maybe he should. And that night, without ceremony, Tasinan sang beneath the stars. Not loud, not for show, just a song for a stranger Eliza had lost, and for the quiet place where memory meets peace. She wept. Not with noise, but with release. Not because she was weak, but because, for the first time, someone had made space for her grief in a language older than pain. Later, as the fire burned low, Eliza whispered, Why were you near the mountain? Tasinan's gaze turned north, toward the peaks, toward what waited beyond them. Because something was stolen, and I intend to take it back. She didn't ask what. Not yet, because what he carried wasn't just a wound in his side. It was a mission, one that had almost taken his life. And now it might become hers too. The following morning, Eliza woke to find Tasinan already standing, his back to her, watching the mist rise from the river like breath from the land itself. His balance was stronger. The fever hadn't returned. But something about the way he stood, silent, still, focused, told her the calm wouldn't last. He turned when she approached, his voice even. I must go to the mountains. Eliza frowned. You're not healed. I don't have time to wait. She folded her arms. Then I'm coming with you. His jaw tensed. It will not be safe. You weren't safe lying in the dirt either, but I helped you anyway. Their eyes met. Tasinan saw it in her. Stubbornness not born from recklessness, but from conviction. From the same place that had made her kneel beside a bleeding man, the world told her to fear. He nodded once. We leave at first light. By afternoon, they had packed light, just enough to survive the 3-day ride through the foothills and into the sacred mountains, a place Tasinan said had not been touched by war, but still carried its scars. As they rode, the trees thickened, the trail narrowed, and the silence between them grew dense, not uncomfortable, but reverent. Eliza spoke first. What was taken? Tasinan didn't look at her when he answered. A stone. She blinked. A stone? He nodded. Not for wealth, not for trade. It is called voeshe, the heartstone, passed from elder to elder for generations. It holds stories, names, a way to speak to those who came before. Eliza's voice softened. Who took it? He answered after a long pause. A man in uniform. He smiled when he did it. Told my uncle the past didn't belong to the wild ones anymore. Eliza's hands tightened on her reins. She understood. Not the tradition, not fully, but the pain of something precious being dismissed, rewritten, stolen. And if you don't get it back? Tasinan glanced at her. Then those who remember will become fewer, and our stories quieter. That night, they made camp in a hollow beneath granite cliffs. Eliza started the fire, while Tasinan placed small stones in a circle, 4 directions, 4 winds, a ritual older than the trees above them. As the flames flickered, he took something from his pouch, a thin length of rawhide, and on it, a carved piece of red cedar. He held it out. For you. She hesitated. What is it? Your name in my tongue. Her voice wavered. You carved it? He nodded. She traced the lines with her thumb. No grand gesture, no performance. Just honor, quiet and deliberate. She looked up. What does it mean? He met her gaze. Woman who remembers light. Eliza had no words, so she did what felt truer than speaking. She tied it around her neck and whispered, Then I'll help you carry your story, even if the mountain never gives it back. And in that stillness, 2 souls beside the fire, beneath sacred sky, something ancient stirred. Not romance in the way the world rushed it, but recognition. And that was the kind of love that never needed to be declared out loud. It simply was. The trail sharpened on the second day. They rode through a narrow pass carved by wind and rain, where stone walls whispered with the voices of time. Every hoofbeat echoed like a memory. Birds did not sing here. Even the wind hushed. Eliza felt it before she understood it. This place was not silent. It was listening. Tasinan slowed his horse and held up a hand. They dismounted without speaking. He turned to her. Beyond that ridge lies the canyon, and beyond the canyon, the cave. Eliza nodded, breath misting in the cool air. Where the Heartstone is? He looked toward the narrowing cliffs, where they left what they thought we would forget. They climbed on foot the rest of the way. Loose gravel, slope slick with morning dew. Eliza's hands blistered, her boots scraped, but she didn't slow. When they reached the top, she gasped. Below them lay a hidden valley, ringed with cliffs, green with untouched grass. At its center, a rocky outcrop rose like a shrine, half buried in wild sage and the ash of old fires. Tassanan stood still. This is where my uncle brought me as a child, where I first heard the story of our people spoken without fear. He stepped forward. Eliza followed him down into the basin. Every step felt sacred, as if the land itself recognized his return. At the base of the rock outcrop, Tassanan crouched beside a slab of stone split down the middle. There, in the dark crack, a glint of something smooth, polished, red. He reached in carefully, pulled it free. The heartstone. Oval, no larger than a palm, veined with quartz and carved with spirals and markings Eliza didn't understand, but felt. Tassanan bowed his head. Eliza stayed back, her hand over her chest. After a long silence, she spoke. How long did you think it would be gone? He stood, eyes still locked on the stone. Long enough for it to be forgotten. He turned to her then. But you remembered. She blinked, confused. Me? You remembered what it meant to listen, to act without being asked, to heal what the world tried to break. His words settled over her like sunrise, warm, quiet, unshakable. Then he stepped forward, pressed the heartstone into her hands. This will return to my people, but for now it belongs with the one who carried me back to it. Eliza stared at the stone, then at him. Why would you trust me with something so sacred? His voice came soft. Because love does not wait for permission to do what is right. She froze. Not because she didn't feel it, but because hearing it made it real. And when he stepped close enough that the stone rested between both their hands, she whispered, Then let this be our beginning. He smiled, just once, and the mountain, though it said nothing, seemed to nod in approval. They camped that night in the shadow of the sacred canyon, the sky a deep blue bruised with stars. The fire crackled low between them, its glow catching in Eliza's copper-blonde hair and Tassanan's calm, steady eyes. The heartstone lay wrapped in leather between them, not hidden, not displayed, just present, like trust. Eliza stirred the pot over the flames, the scent of wild onion and dried elk filling the cool air. She didn't speak much, and neither did he, but their silence wasn't empty. It was earned. You're not afraid anymore, Tassanan said quietly. Eliza smiled, watching the sparks rise. Of you, I never was? He shook his head gently. Not me, of what you're choosing. She paused, because he was right. Saving him, following him, holding that stone, none of it had been the plan. It had been instinct, heart, a step forward into something unwritten, and she had not once looked back. What I'm choosing, she said, isn't just you. It's a life I thought I wasn't allowed to want. He looked at her, still, thoughtful. And what kind is that? She met his gaze. One where I don't belong to anyone else's version of what's right, where healing matters more than rules, and where the man beside me doesn't need to ask permission to exist. Tassanan said nothing for a long moment. Then, gently, he reached for her hand. No pull, no force, just presence. Then maybe this land didn't bring us together to return something old, but to begin something new. That night, as the fire died down, Eliza curled beside him under a blanket of deer hide and woven cloth. His warmth was steady, not urgent, just there. And for the first time since she lost her brother, she slept without waking in fear. Because the man beside her was not just a survivor, he was her safe place now. At dawn, thunder murmured in the distance. They broke camp quickly, packing the stone with care. Rain came just as they crossed the ridgeline, soft but growing heavier. By the time they reached the forest trail, they were soaked, but neither complained. Tassanan turned his horse to look back once more at the sacred mountain, then at Eliza. You still want to follow this path? She smiled beneath her wet hat brim. I've followed you into worse. This time, we ride back with something that belongs to more than just me. Eliza nodded. We ride back with a story no one can erase. And as they disappeared into the forest, soaked and shivering but unshaken, the land whispered behind them. Not goodbye, but go and keep remembering. By the time they reached the edge of the valley, the rain had softened into mist, and the scent of pine hung thick in the air. Tassanan slowed his horse and looked out across the distant prairie, a land both welcoming and unkind. He knew what waited beyond those hills, soldiers, settlers, uncertain eyes. But this time he would not return alone. Eliza rode beside him, and her presence, quiet, sure, unashamed, meant something the world could not take. Once we reach the northern camp, he said, they will ask why you are with me. Eliza looked at him, firm. Then tell them the truth. He raised an eyebrow. She smiled. Tell them I came not to explain who you are, but to remember it with you. He said nothing, but she saw it, the shift in his posture, a loosening, a knowing. because he had carried his past like armor, and now she was helping him carry his future. They arrived at the Cheyenne winter camp just after sundown. Smoke curled from low fires. Children's laughter echoed in the distance. Elders sat beneath stretched hides, their hands moving as they told stories to those who still listened. Tasinan dismounted first. Many recognized him, some with narrowed eyes, others with silent nods. One old woman stepped forward. Nahani, the elder matron of the valley. She looked at him, then at Eliza, and then at the wrapped bundle in his hand. Voish, she whispered. Tasinan knelt and offered the heartstone with 2 hands. She took it gently, pressed it to her chest, and wept, not loudly, but with the deep, low sound of someone who had waited years to be heard again. Eliza stood back, watching. She did not speak. She did not move. But then Nahani turned to her. You rode with him? Eliza nodded. I helped him return it. The old woman studied her, then reached forward, touching Eliza's forehead with 2 fingers. Then you are part of the memory now. That night, they were given space by the fire, food cooked with care, and eyes that did not question her place. Because Tasinan had already claimed her as kin, not possession. Later, as the fire dimmed, he leaned close to her. I thought returning the stone would be the end. She looked at him. Feels more like a beginning. Tasinan smiled. Soft, rare, full of truth. Then let's begin where stories are strongest. He took her hand, not as a shield, not as a guide, but as his equal. And in the space between language, silence, and firelight, a new story was born. Not of conquest, not of rescue, but of remembrance, healing, and chosen love. The days that followed were quiet in the best way. Eliza and Tasinan stayed among the Cheyenne for a time, not as guests, not as outsiders, but as part of the rhythm. She helped the women dry roots, gather herbs, and tend to the sick. He spent long hours with the elders, listening to stories that had almost been lost and repeating them aloud so the young would not forget. The heartstone, now placed in its rightful shrine, had brought more than memory back to the people. It had brought hope. And Eliza could feel it in every fire circle, every prayer said in the soft tongue of ancestors, the sense that something sacred had been returned. But for her, the most sacred thing was the way Tasinan began to look at her, not as someone passing through, but as someone meant to stay. One evening, as the sun set in golden lines across the open field, Tasinan met her by the riverbank. She stood barefoot in the cool mud, sleeves rolled, cheeks flushed from laughter and work. He simply said, I have been many things in this life, a warrior, a brother, a man without a place. He stepped closer. But with you, I feel something I've never known. She didn't speak, just waited. He reached into the pouch at his side and pulled out a ring, simple, hand-carved, made of polished antler and turquoise. In our way, he said, we don't marry with gold, we join what's from the land, so the land remembers us. He held it out. If you wear this, you do not belong to me. You walk beside me, and if one day you wish to walk another path, I will still honor your name. Eliza's throat tightened, because no one had ever spoken to her like that. Not in town, not before, not even in the quiet dreams she once had of love. She took the ring and slid it on. It fit like it had always been waiting for her. She looked up. Then let the land remember this. I chose you. That night, there was no ceremony. Just a fire, a circle of family, and a long, low song sung by Nahani. And later, as Eliza lay with her head against Tazinan's chest, she whispered into the dark, I don't want to go back. He brushed her hair gently. Then we don't. And in that stillness, in that chosen silence, they stayed. Not lost, not hiding, not waiting, but rooted. The following week, a rider arrived from Fort Wallace. He came alone, wearing a tired coat and a badge that gleamed too clean for the trail dust he carried. He asked for Tazinan by name, and when the elders called him, Eliza stood beside him without hesitation. The rider looked surprised, not by the Cheyenne warrior, but by her. Miss Monroe, they said you were gone, that you ran off. Eliza's voice was calm. I didn't run, I chose. The man cleared his throat, uncomfortable. There was an incident. Soldiers found Cheyenne arrowheads near a burned-out supply wagon. Some in town. They're talking. Tasinan's expression didn't change. Eliza spoke before he could. He's been here every day, healing, rebuilding what you tried to erase. The rider looked at her, almost apologetic. We're not here to bring war, not again, but rumors. Rumors turn into fear. Tasinan stepped forward. Then perhaps it is time the fort heard a different story. 2 days later, he and Eliza rode into town together. For the first time, side by side, not hiding, they stood in front of the very courthouse where soldiers once signed away land and promises. Eliza handed over her written statement, not about battle, not about theft, about truth, about the sacred object returned, the elders' testimony, and the trail of peace now walked instead of hunted. It wasn't for revenge, it was for record. Because if history was going to be written, they would write it the right way. The townsfolk watched from porches and boardwalks. Some stared, some whispered, But a few, just a few, tipped their hats in silence. And one young girl handed Eliza a folded note before hurrying away. I want to be brave like you. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she held it. Tassanon looked at her. You already are the story they'll one day tell. They didn't stay in town long. There was nothing left for them there. Not really. Only proof that what they carried in their hearts now mattered more than what they left behind. As they rode back toward the valley, Eliza glanced at Tassanon, her voice soft. If the world keeps watching us, what should we do? He smiled gently, the way only he could. Let them. We'll keep walking anyway. The first snowfall came early that year. Thin at first, just a dusting on the sage and pine, but enough to turn the valley into a quiet canvas, untouched and still. Eliza stood outside the lodge, wrapped in a woven blanket, watching the white settle over the trees. Inside, Tassanon stirred the morning fire. No rush, no noise, just peace. And it was real. Not the kind found in letters or laws, but in the breath between two people who had walked through pain, carried memory, and still reached for each other without fear. Later that day, children gathered near the fire circle, and Eliza read from her journal. She spoke slowly, letting the words take shape in the smoke. This is the story of a man who was never lost, only hunted, and the woman who saw in him not danger, but truth. Together, they carried back what war tried to erase, and found that love, when chosen freely, is the strongest kind of resistance. Tassanon listened from behind her, arms folded, face unreadable. But when she finished, he stood and spoke in Lakota first, then translated slowly. Some stories are not meant to end. They are meant to be lived again and again, in every voice that remembers, in every hand that heals, and in every heart that does not run. Eliza turned toward him, eyes bright with quiet fire. And he added one more sentence. This is our story now. That night, they sat by the fire, shoulder to shoulder, fingers intertwined. No crowds, no ceremony. But the heartstone glowed nearby in its resting place, its lines carved deeper now, not from erosion, but from use. It had been touched, held, loved. Like them, Eliza leaned into him, her voice soft. You think they'll forget again someday? Tassanon looked out over the valley. Only if we stop remembering, she smiled. Then let's never stop. And as the fire warmed the snowlight, and two lives bound by risk, courage, and chosen love rested in the stillness of the sacred land, the wind whispered nothing, because it no longer needed to carry their story. It simply listened.